Hello and welcome back to Karma Stories. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a couple stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. These ones are all kind of business based with an awesome one about phone numbers. I recommend you stick this one out because it's pretty darn good. Before we start, if you haven't already, make sure to check out the Karma Stories Patreon located at patreon.com/Karma Stories, where I'm releasing exclusive content to people who have signed up over there. It's a couple of stories that are just too much for YouTube, like Pro Revenge, and I even did a little vlog video from my garage there, and I'm going to be adding more on there later today. So, jump on over to patreon.com/Karma Stories. I hope to see you there. On to today's stories, let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Adiantum Veneris. Make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it? Okay. My previous workplace was an NGO that hired me to do what was considered an impossible task, reaching and gaining the support of several groups that are notoriously difficult to recruit. It was a critical moment, with over $1.2 million in funding at stake. Not to brag, but this happens to be something I'm actually an expert in, one of very few in my country. I got to work and used some pretty unorthodox methods. Initially, management seemed fine with that since the results were extremely effective. Within 8 months, the organization went from being largely irrelevant to having a small army of volunteers, active groups, and vocal ambassadors. It also earned a reputation for being the most radical and interesting player on the scene. The thing is, this success only existed because I was there to compensate for the organization's lack of relevance. Unless they made some deeper structural changes, this was as good as it was going to get. But nobody seemed very interested in making those changes. In fact, they started engaging in increasingly problematic behavior. Think public racist comments by staff, which made it harder and harder to maintain the support I had built. I kept raising the alarm that this wouldn't end well, and eventually this, along with my unconventional methods, annoyed management enough that they decided to fire me. I pointed out to my manager that if they didn't want to lose all the progress, they'd need to hire someone with similar experience, which would be very difficult since there were so few experts in this field. In response, my manager demanded that I write a document for my future replacement, specifically designed so that somebody with absolutely zero prior knowledge could understand it. Zero knowledge, you say? Alright. I sat down and wrote an extensive document, which included nothing but the most obvious, basic, and offensively unhelpful information. No, you cannot call people slurs. No, not even when they aren't present. Written as if for a third grader. If they hired someone competent, they wouldn't need the document anyway. If they hired someone clueless, well, they'd probably be able to understand it. I left the organization in September, but stayed in touch with some of my former crew. By the end of November, half the volunteers I had recruited dropped out. The 200 plus people involved in one of the flagship projects simply stopped showing up. The assistance network stopped responding altogether. They tried to continue one of the other long-running projects, but since they didn't know how or why it worked, it flopped gloriously and ended after just one more session. The annual fundraiser I had started completely failed when they tried to replicate it in December. Only 7 people showed up. 3 of the group chose to leave and operate under a different host, and they publicly called out management for being both out of touch and abusive. Oh, and as of today, it looks like they lost the $1.2 million in funding too. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called T. James V. It says, "Wow, talk about manglement. You've got to be seriously out of touch to see a successful project, poison it with bad PR, and then fire the expert behind it for raising concerns. Then to have the nerve and ignorance to ask said expert to write a cheat sheet for dummies to handle this huge, complicated, and high-stakes project. As if a new hire with a tutorial can replace the effing expert." OP responded and said, "It was both infuriating and hilarious to me that they both fired me due to taking an issue with my methods, that's what they claimed anyway, and at the same breath, asked for the recipe." Another commenter down below called ECP001 said, "Once hearing you're fired or the equivalent, anything that happens is not your effing problem. Just grab your personal stuff and leave. Deadlines, open commitments, and pending responses are someone else's responsibility. even if that person hasn't been hired yet. Management can create situations where, surprisingly, crap does flow uphill. OP responded to this one and said, I tried to maintain a level of professionalism, at least superficially. I completely agree with the commenter. If you fire me, why the heck would I do anything else for you? Yeah, no. And if you told me to write that before you fired me, I would obviously see the writing was on the wall there as well. Yeah, you definitely don't owe them anything, especially when they say you're done. Now, OP updated this story a year later. This was posted 4 days ago. It's titled, Update, Make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it? Okay. About a year ago, I wrote a very messy and awkwardly worded post describing how my old boss had me fired for being a whistleblower. They cited my very well-proven unorthodox methods, among other bogus claims, and demanded I create a document for my future replacement. Make it so a person with zero knowledge could understand it, they said. So I did. I never expected to write a follow-up, and definitely not this one. I couldn't have come up with this chain of events if I'd tried. Predictably, things began to unravel almost immediately after I left the organization. Projects collapsed, partnerships I had built disintegrated, volunteers left, some in protest. Community engagement, trust, and support from our target groups vanished. My replacement, not only completely clueless, but also a non-functional alcoholic who didn't even want the job. Apparently, she had been lied to. She managed to drive every single program into the ground. That, in turn, alienated the donors. But that's not even the whole story. One of the comments on my original post, shout out to user Sean BZA, suggested I contact the IRS, as there might be fraud involved. Well, you weren't far off. I didn't contact any authorities and tried to avoid escalating anything. But I accidentally tipped off the manager of the organization's biggest funder that something was wrong. I didn't even realize it at the time. We just ran into each other at an event and started chatting. I casually mentioned I'd been fired from the organization that December. The manager looked confused. What do you mean? They said you worked there until March and left on your own. After a few more puzzled exchanges, I also mentioned that the crew from one of the flagship programs had shut it down a few months prior. Turns out the organization reported it as if the program was still running. Long story short, the foundation investigated, and it was not pretty. But wait, there's more. The other major funder was a government grant program. On my very first day of work, I flat out told them the grant was extremely unreliable and would likely last only 2 to 3 years before being shut down for being too progressive. I urged them to prepare a backup plan for when that inevitably happened. Well, guess how that turned out? And now for the weirdest plot twist. Eventually, the CEO decided to jump the sinking, burning ship and quit. Or maybe they got fired. When I saw the open call for a new CEO, I decided, mostly as a troll move, to apply, just for my own amusement. I didn't expect to hear back given my history with the organization and, frankly, my limited experience in that type of role. My expertise is very niche. I just wanted to rub it in a little. Sent my resume and cover letter, then forgot about it. Well, a couple of months later, they called, asked if I was still interested, and invited me for an interview. I thought about it for a few minutes and decided to politely decline. It was tempting, honestly, but I knew I'd hate the job, and probably be terrible at it too. My skills and my heart lie elsewhere. I've recently decided to take a break from work altogether to focus on physical and mental health, and while I'm at it, pursue a master's degree. Best of luck to whoever takes that CEO position, they're going to need it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Boring History Fan. It says, I suspect they'd have hired you as CEO solely so they could scapegoat you. Once you know there's fraud afoot, no reason to touch anything to do with them, even with a 10-foot pole. OP responded and said, honestly, it might be the case, since they already proved ethics are not their forte. Another commenter called the Razilim said, I would have at least taken the interview just for the comedic value of walking into the room and being like, surprise, mother effers. From the sounds of things, they don't know their butt from their elbow, so it's very possible that whoever was setting up and conducting the interviews either didn't know or remember you. Yeah, with all the problems that OP has highlighted for this company and just the shady crap that's going on, there would be no way you could ever convince me to take that CEO job, especially since in another comment, they said that the CEO doesn't get paid well either. OP, I wish you the best and good luck on getting your master's. That is awesome. This story comes to us from Plonk. When the metric becomes the target, a cautionary tale on being careful what you measure. This happened about 8 years ago when I was still working for a North American Class 1 railroad. I worked in IT, specifically in a department whose primary role was to generate metrics and regulatory reporting for the Surface Transportation Board and their ilk. Most of our measures were inward facing though, covering such things as volume, dwell, revenue, and productivity. This story involves a problematic dashboard in the last category, specifically a measure of the productivity of our unionized office workers. The managers loved it because it gave them a weekly graph of who needed corrective punishment for underperforming. Our toxic CEO of the day was all about punishment. They even had quotas to meet. It was in regards to this last one that, I'll call him B, made the short walk across to our building so that he could ask me about the metric. He'd just come from an uncomfortable meeting with his direct manager who showed him how he was the lowest performing employee on their graph, by a wide margin. His manager told him to pick up the pace or he'd face potential repercussions, possibly even a 1-week suspension. B came to me because he knew I had access to the back end of the metrics, and he wanted to know what they were measuring him on because he was never not busy. Some important background on B is that he was a very senior, conscientious employee. He had as much experience as the rest of his group combined, and he came to me because we went back about 20 years from my time in the union before I moved to IT. The job of their group was to work the queue, that is, go into the failure queue of events that had caked for one reason or another, resolve the issue, and allow the automated functions to flow properly. A couple of trivial examples would be a train lift failing because the cars had not been properly reported into the customer's track, or conversely, they'd been reported in, but the customer had not electronically released them out yet. Because he had so much experience, B took it upon himself to handpick the really messy, time-consuming ones from the queue, ones where somebody had backdated events, and it took some faffing about to figure out what was wrong, and what needed to be fixed. Or where a conductor took all the paperwork home and forgot to update this tablet with the switching that he'd done. Basically, if it was something that might require phone calls and deep research, he would deal with it, rather than let inexperienced folks struggle with it. I pulled up a pre-production version of the dashboard and scrolled through the source code to find the important bits. We discovered that it was looking for clusters of specific event types reported under an employee's user ID, with at least a 2-minute gap between the clusters. He was puzzled over the last requirement, but I explained that it was so that a single train being processed would only count as one event. It might take a few minutes to fix the train, but the reporting was at the car level, and as long as no more than 2 minutes elapsed between the report on one car and the next, it would all count as a single incident to the dashboard. So it doesn't look at how many records you handle, only that they happen more than 2 minutes apart? He paused for a moment before adding, "That's really dumb. They don't care about complexity. They're seriously just counting how many times a person clicks OK. Somebody could game that pretty easily if they wanted. He walked away without saying anything else, but I could see the mental gears turning. He came back to me a couple of weeks later to give me the good news. He had gone from being the most underperforming person in his group to being their top employee by just as big a margin. "It's great," he told me. "Forget all the complicated crap. I'm just grabbing the biggest trains from the queue. I work one screen of cars, then sit back and drink my coffee for exactly 3 minutes before I process the next. I finally have time to complete the crossword puzzle in my paper." Sadly, the company attributed his malicious turnaround to their draconian discipline practices and never clued in that while their numbers went up, their actual productivity had tanked a bit. The only real consequence to him was that his job became a lot easier, and he got to slide into retirement on a high note. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Costing Geek. It says, "This effect is frequently referred to as Goodhart's Law. In its simplest form, states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure." Unfortunately, when you're tracking so many metrics, it really becomes only the numbers that matter to the people higher up, and sometimes the actual process just falls by the wayside. B in this story was fortunate to have OP as a friend and realize they were able to game the system to make sliding into retirement a heck of a lot easier. This story comes to us from 0313. You want me to answer your office phone for you while I'm working from home? Several years ago, a friend, Mark, started a home-based computer software business. He and his wife lived in their home for about 10 years and had a well-established home phone number. This was around the time that cell phones were just beginning to be popular, so 95% of people still used mainly landlines. Mark worked 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., the same shift as his wife, so his customers could be free to discuss their computer needs uninterrupted after their own businesses closed for the day. Most computer maintenance still had to be done in person instead of remotely, so customers could drop off devices after work and pick them up from Mark's back porch on their way to work the next day. All went swimmingly for a few months until a new doctor opened up a practice in town, complete with a telephone number differing from Mark's by 1 digit. Mark's number had a 3, where the medical office had an 8 in the last 4 number combination. Misdialing was frequent. At first, there were occasional calls to which Mark would patiently redirect the caller. As time wore on and the practice got more and more referrals from local hospitals to give Dr. New in town an established client base, the calls began to come at all hours, 24 hours a day, weekends, nights, holidays, you name it. The office still got calls after hours to an answering service for patients to find out who was on call, and for the hospital staff to reach doctors after hours. Mark had to unplug the phone just to have a conversation over lunch with his wife, and in order to sleep. Also not ideal when you have 3 daughters of dating age out after dark. Mark called the doctor's office and asked them to please change their phone number so he and his family could get some peace and quiet, and so he could build his own business to support them. Since he had his phone longer, he felt the doctor should be gracious and change his number to a different one to stop the confusion. He was told in about so many words by the doctor that it was too bad, but nothing was going to be done, as advertising, stationery, business cards, and signage were expensive to redo, not to mention convey the new information to all his patients, medical registries, the medical board and societies, and hospitals. Just do the best you can. I'm sure the calls will stop soon. Good luck to you. Okie dokie. I'll do my best to take care of things, Mark cheerfully replied. After that, Mark began to field all the calls that came in personally. You've had the sniffles all morning after working in the yard around pollen? You'd better come right in. You start coughing every time you smoke a cigarette? Come on in. I'm not the doctor, but a temperature of 98.9 sounds a little high to me. We'll see you right after lunch today. You're new in town and have kids who need physicals and shots for school next week? It just so happens we have an opening in an hour. No, don't worry. We can take all 5 of them at once, today. Whatever the problem was, he started making appointments for each and every person calling. All were delighted to have such personal attention and prompt appointments. Sure, we take all insurance plans. Come right in. He also made routine checkup type appointments for 4:30 p.m. one Friday afternoon for 6 different people. Bright and early the next Monday morning, Dr. Newentown called and begged them to stop. Mark said, "I will if you will." The doctor had a new phone number before the end of the week. There are so many comments down below this one of people with similar stories. One for a radio station where they sent everybody to the radio station immediately because they'd all won the grand prize. Another one taking tee-off times for a golf course and saying, "Wow, you're lucky. We just had an opening at 8:20 a.m. on Saturday." And the best one from a user called Wilk Van Buren, it says, "Not me, but a friend of mine had a house phone that was 2 digits off the local video store. His younger sister worked at that video store. He was forever getting yelled at by her because people would call his house and he would tell them they had plenty of a particular movie in stock and would be happy to reserve one for them, causing his sister no end of frustration when they showed up at the store." It really was simpler times back when the phone numbers didn't come up when you were calling somebody else. There used to be so many good phone prank calls that could be done. I mean, Just watch The Simpsons sometimes, and you'll see a whole bunch of them. Feeling nostalgic right now, remembering the phones with the dials on them. Kinda dating myself here, and I guess that's probably a good spot to end this episode. So, if you enjoyed this one, make sure to hit that like button on your preferred podcasting platform. And if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really does help us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.